Donald Trump, the former president, has just revealed something jaw-dropping about Jerusalem. It's got everyone talking and wondering if it's a sign of the end times. On December 6, 2017, the United States officially said, Jerusalem is the capital city of Israel. This means they see it as Israel's main city. Former President Donald Trump made this official, and he also said the American embassy would move there from Tel Aviv. This made the embassy of the United States in Jerusalem. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, liked this decision a lot and said good things about it. But America's Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, made it clear that this didn't decide everything about Jerusalem. He said the borders and other important things would still be talked about by both Israel and Palestine. Jerusalem has been at the center of conflicts involving three major religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. This ancient city has been in the news lately due to the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict. Its name is equally significant to Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Scholars believe the first human settlements in Jerusalem date back to around 3500 BC during the early Bronze Age. Around 1000 BC, King David conquered Jerusalem, making it the capital of the Jewish kingdom. His son, Solomon, built the first temple, which became renowned for housing the Holy Ark of the Covenant. However, the Babylonians destroyed this temple in 586 BCE, leading to the exile of Jews from Jerusalem. About 50 years later, the Persian king Cyrus allowed Jews to return and rebuild their temple. Over time, Jerusalem was occupied by various groups, including Romans, Persians, Arabs, Crusaders, and Muslims. Temple Mount, a compound on a hill in Jerusalem, holds religious significance for all three major religions. It encompasses the Western Wall, the Dome of the Rock, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. For Jews, it is the holiest place, believed to be the site where Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son, Isaac. The Dome of the Rock is considered by Muslims as the place from which Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. The Western Wall, managed by the Rabbi of the Western Wall, is the closest place where Jews can pray to the Holy of Holies. The Temple Mount is also important for Christians, as it is mentioned in both the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, located in the Christian Quarter, is believed to be the site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Despite its religious significance, Jerusalem has been fraught with tension and conflict. Jews are not allowed to pray openly at the Western Wall, which causes frustration among Palestinians. This ongoing dispute attracts radical groups, making it challenging to find a resolution. In simpler terms, Jerusalem is a very old city that is important to three religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. People have been fighting over it for a long time. There's a place called Temple Mount, where there are important religious sites like the Western Wall, Dome of the Rock, and Al-Aqsa Mosque. For Jews, this area is super important because they think it's where Abraham almost sacrificed his son and where their ancient temples stood. Muslims also think it's special because they believe Prophet Muhammad went to heaven from there. Christians think it's important too because it's mentioned in their holy books as the place where Jesus was crucified and came back to life. So, when Trump said something big was going to happen in Jerusalem, it got everyone talking. Some people were really excited and thought it meant something amazing was going to happen. They thought it was a sign that their religious beliefs were true. But not everyone believed Trump. Some thought he was just saying it to get attention. They pointed out that Trump often said controversial things, and they didn't trust him. This whole thing caused a lot of arguments and discussions among different groups of people. Christians, Jews, and Muslims all had different ideas about what Trump's prophecy meant. Some thought it was a sign that the end of the world was near, while others were more cautious and didn't want to get too excited. The media also got involved and talked a lot about Trump's prophecy. They analyzed everything he said and tried to figure out what he meant. People on social media were also talking about it a lot, sharing their opinions and speculations. Few days ago, some archaeologists in Jerusalem found something incredible buried deep beneath the ancient streets. Maybe they discover a hidden chamber filled with ancient artifacts, like precious jewels, ancient scrolls, and mysterious relics. These scrolls had secrets written on them from thousands of years ago. One of these secrets sounded a lot like something Donald Trump once said. It talked about Jerusalem becoming the capital of Israel forever. When people heard about this, they got excited. They thought maybe it was time for this old prophecy to come true. But the discovery of these old scrolls did more than just spark arguments. It made people curious about Jerusalem's past. They wanted to learn more about its history and why it was so special. As more people visited Jerusalem, it became a busy place full of tourists. They came to see the ancient sites and learn about the city's past. However, even with all the excitement, Jerusalem still faced challenges. People still disagreed about who should control the city. But the prophecy coming true reminded everyone that words and beliefs can be very powerful. Around 4,000 years ago, God made a promise to Abraham that his descendants would inherit a specific land area, which includes modern-day Israel. However, due to various historical events, including the rejection of Jesus by the Jewish people, they were exiled from this land for almost 2,000 years. In 1948, Israel was reborn as a nation, but their neighbors didn't like it. Over time, a few peace treaties were signed, but many Arab countries still refused to acknowledge Israel's right to exist. Then, in 2020, something remarkable happened. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain surprised the world by agreeing to make peace with Israel. This was known as the Abraham Accords, signed on the White House lawn. Now, why is this important? Well, there's a prophecy in the Bible that talks about a peace agreement being signed between Israelis and Palestinians 7 years before some major events, including the return of Jesus. This prophecy is found in the book of Daniel. Some people see a connection between the Abraham Accords and this prophecy because the Accords recognize Israel's right to exist in the land promised to Abraham. Some believe that the signing of these accords could be the beginning of a final 7-year period mentioned in prophecy. Now, there's talk about the Antichrist, a figure from biblical prophecy. But, according to the Bible, the Antichrist is expected to come from Europe, so it's unlikely that any current world leader, like former President Trump, could be the Antichrist. In the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians, Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas wants negotiations to be led by the international community, specifically by a group called the Middle East Quartet, which includes the UN, EU, Russia, and the United States. If this happens, it could play a big role in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. But let's not get too caught up in guessing who the Antichrist is. Instead, let's focus on the importance of understanding and fulfilling prophecies. The signing of the Abraham Accords is seen as a significant event in this context. Jerusalem is a city with a long history, often mentioned in biblical texts. Despite facing destruction multiple times, it was always rebuilt. Why? Because of a promise made by Jehovah in the Garden of Eden regarding the coming of the Messiah. The Jews, who believed in Jehovah's promises, knew that Jerusalem wouldn't stay desolate forever. They had faith in Jeremiah's prophecy that predicted a 70-year limit on Jerusalem's desolation. They also knew from Isaiah's prophecy that Jerusalem would be restored and become glorious when the Messiah came. Despite the challenges, the survival of key figures like Jehoiachin and Jehos proved to them that God was preserving the kingly and priestly lines. They saw this as a sign of hope, knowing that God was preparing for their return to rebuild Jerusalem. In a remarkable prophecy in Daniel 9:25, the angel Gabriel foretold the timing of the Messiah's arrival in Jerusalem. He mentioned the importance of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem before the Messiah's coming. This decree was issued by King Xerxes of Persia in 444 BC, allowing Nehemiah to rebuild Jerusalem. The temple had already been restored earlier under Zerubbabel. From the issuing of this decree until the Messiah's arrival, there would be a specific time frame. This decree marked the beginning of the countdown to the Messiah's arrival, bringing hope to the Jewish people. In the prophecy of Daniel, a specific time frame is mentioned. It says there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, totaling 483 years, from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem in 444 BC to the time of Christ. The rebuilding of Jerusalem was completed in 395 BC, fulfilling the first 7 weeks. Then, 62 weeks later, after a total of 483 years, Jesus Christ, the promised Messiah, entered Jerusalem. To understand the exact timing, we need to account for the difference in the length of the Jewish year, which was 360 days. When we convert the years to days and count down from 444 BC, we arrive at March 30th, AD 33, the day celebrated as Palm Sunday when Jesus entered Jerusalem. The return of the Jews to Jerusalem was initiated by the decree of Cyrus, the Persian conqueror of Babylon, in 536 BC. However, they faced opposition, especially from the Samaritans, who interfered with the rebuilding of the temple. Despite setbacks and fear, The prophets Haggai and Zechariah encouraged the Jews to resume building, leading to the completion of the temple during the reign of Darius. 15 years after the temple's foundation was laid, prophets like Haggai and Zechariah encouraged the Jews to continue rebuilding despite opposition from the Persian-appointed officials. They reminded everyone that Cyrus had decreed the rebuilding of the temple. Scholars have debated whether it was Cyrus or someone else mentioned in Daniel 9:25 who issued this decree, with some pointing to Cyrus's prophecies in Isaiah 44 and 45. The prophet Isaiah foretold about Cyrus, a king who would be raised up by the Lord to accomplish his plans. Isaiah mentioned that Cyrus would rebuild Jerusalem and allow the Jewish exiles to return home without seeking any reward. This prophecy is found in Isaiah 44 and 45. Cyrus's decree to rebuild Jerusalem is also mentioned in the Bible, particularly in Ezra 1:2-4. In this decree, Cyrus acknowledged that the Lord God of heaven had commanded him to build a house in Jerusalem. He instructed the Jewish exiles to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple of the Lord. Some scholars debate whether the rebuilding of Jerusalem happened during Cyrus's time or later under King Artaxerxes, nearly a century later. However, there's no clear biblical evidence of Jerusalem's rebuilding before Ezra's journey in 457 BC. Despite the lack of biblical evidence, extra-biblical Jewish sources like the apocryphal book of 1 Esdras and the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus suggest that Jerusalem's rebuilding started earlier. Josephus mentioned that after reading Isaiah's prophecies, Cyrus was motivated to help the Jews return to their land and rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. However, despite Cyrus's intentions, there were challenges in implementing the rebuilding plans. In Ezra 4:1-5, it's recorded that opposition arose, leading to a halt in the rebuilding process. During the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple, the people of the land opposed the efforts of the Jews. They hired counselors to sabotage their plans, causing trouble throughout the reign of Cyrus, the king of Persia, until the time of Darius. Despite these challenges, the Jews were able to complete the temple within 4.5 years, according to Ezra 6:15, during the 6th year of King Darius's reign. The completion of the temple brought great joy, as it meant the restoration of worship to Jehovah in Jerusalem. This was an important step as preparations were made for the prophesied final 7 years, which will see significant fulfillment of prophecies. During the first half of these final 7 years, known as the Great Tribulation, the third temple will be built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Animal sacrifices will resume, but they will be halted by the Antichrist, who will falsely claim to be the Messiah and God. This event, called the Abomination of Desolation, will trigger the second half of the Great Tribulation. During this challenging time, God will send 2 witnesses who will preach for 3.5 years, despite the Great Tribulation. Their preaching will lead to a great revival, as prophesied in Revelation 7:4, which speaks of a revival among the Jewish people. This period will be marked by significant prophetic fulfillment, paving the way for the return of Jesus Christ. During the tribulation, there will be terrible wars, famines, plagues, and natural disasters as God pours out his wrath against sin and wickedness. The Antichrist will sign a covenant with Israel for 7 years, but halfway through, he will break it and make war against Israel. He will commit the abomination of desolation by setting up an image of himself to be worshipped in the rebuilt Jerusalem temple. This marks the beginning of the Great Tribulation, a time of extreme trouble. At the end of the tribulation, Jesus will return, defeat the Antichrist and his armies in the Battle of Armageddon, and establish his earthly kingdom for 1,000 years.